There's yet another attempt in Somalia to install a strong central government after years of chaos. But can this really succeed when so many previous attempts have failed? And how different will this government be from the transitional administration that has been accused of massive corruption in recent years? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mike Hanna. Somalia enters a new chapter, possibly. That comes after 250 new members of parliament were sworn in this week. Many hope this will mark an end to years of a largely ineffective central government. After 2 decades of lawlessness and violence, hopes are high and enthusiasm back in the capital, Mogadishu. The next main task of the parliament will be to choose a president. But many of the candidates were part of a transitional government that has been hammered by corruption allegations. Nazanin Mashiri reports from Mogadishu.
Somalia's new parliamentarians are sworn in, promising to uphold the constitution and religious values of the country. But just a few hours earlier, what is usually a car park at the African Union's airport base was frantically being prepared. Officials couldn't find a secure venue in time, raising questions about how safe Mogadishu really is. For the men and women taking part, the location is irrelevant. This is still an historic moment.
I'm very, very happy and proud of myself, and I'm proud of my country. To be part of it is just like something that I can't even explain with the words.
Women are supposed to take a third of the seats. So far, they've only around 16% of the share. And there's a dispute over the names of the remaining MPs. This man, President Sheikh Sharif, is unhappy with the process. There is a deepening rivalry between him and these 2 men, the Prime Minister and the former Speaker of Parliament.
Real politics is about how you make the right kind of compromises and the right arrangements so that you arrive at a better system for your country. And I think President, whoever else, are discovering that. They can't have everything that they want, and that's just the basic rule.
Members of Somalia's last parliament were accused of corruption and infighting. Politicians say this time things will be better.
Simply by the quality of the parliamentarians that have been brought into the parliament, high quality, highly educated intellectuals that are really ready to serve the country and the people. And I think the country will definitely feel and see the difference.
Despite all the obstacles, there is a sense of real optimism here in Mogadishu. This is the first election of its kind in this capital for more than 20 years. And many people feel they have a real stake in the political process. Territorial gains against the armed group Al-Shabaab mean for the first time in 8 years, a new Somali government will have some control outside Mogadishu. It will also have more of a say over its finances and political institutions. Somalia has taken its first step towards stability. These politicians now need to prove they're up to the job. Nazanin Mashiri, Al Jazeera, Mogadishu.
Well, this is the 15th attempt to form a new government in the past 2 decades. And throughout this time, Somalia has experienced ongoing clan violence, the rise of religious militia, invasion by outside forces, wide-scale banditry, and of course, famine. Let's take a look at these turbulent years of political vacuum. In 1991, the long-time dictator Mohammed Siad Barre was ousted by clan leaders, but never really replaced as civil war erupted. Then famine and a US-led international force in what was called Operation Restore Hope became just another player in the ongoing violence. This culminated in a pitched battle in the capital Mogadishu after US Black Hawk helicopters were shot down. The international forces then withdrew. In 2000, a national transitional government was appointed after talks in neighbouring Djibouti, but it never took office in the face of opposition from warlords. 4 years later, after talks in Kenya, a transitional federal government was formed, but within 2 years it had lost the capital to a religious-based militia that became known as Al-Shabaab. In 2006, Ethiopian troops invaded and toppled the Islamic Courts Union that controlled most of the south of the country, retaking the capital. Then, even as the US carried out airstrikes at what it said were al-Qaeda leaders, al-Shabaab regained control of Mogadishu. But the battle in the south continued to rage, and by August 2011, the transitional federal government was back in control of the capital, and with the backing of African Union mission troops, AMISOM has managed to stay there. So will this be the end of the political and social chaos in Somalia? To answer this question, we're joined by our guests. In London, Jamal Osman. He's a Somali award-winning journalist and filmmaker. In Doha, Afyari Elmi. He's a Somali political analyst and professor of international politics at Qatar University. And via broadband from Minneapolis, Abdi Ismail Samatar. He's professor of geography at the University of Minnesota. Welcome to you all. Let's begin with Afyari Elmi. Is there really cause for optimism here?
Well, it could have been, but it seems that the UN, which controlled the process, has missed another important opportunity, simply because, at least the way the process has been handled, it recycles the status quo. When you look at the number of the parliaments, more than 50% are coming from the old parliament, and simply because this happened because of too much intervention with the process, and the constitution making was also same as that. And I think this is going to compromise the legitimacy of the outcome which comes out of this as a result.
Well, Abdi Ismail Samatar, do you think that the process is already flawed before a new government is even in place?
I think Professor Afyari is quite right, but I may just add one or two caveats to that. First, I think the business of politics and transformations and transitions are always loaded with all kinds of scenarios. My hope is that there are enough parliamentarians who are relatively new, and some of them who have a great deal of integrity and competence, that if those people are able to come through the process, then the promise is quite substantial. But if the United Nations, as Professor Afyari have suggested, maintains the same kind of all corrupt rules, then this opportunity will be turned into ash, if you like.
Well, I want to get back to the composition of the parliament in a moment, but first I'd like to go to Jamal Osman in London and put that question about whether the enthusiasm that we have seen in Mogadishu is justified.
I think I would say there is optimism in the air, and a lot of Somalis, when you talk to them, whether they are inside the country or outside the country, there is hope, which hasn't been there for the last 2 decades. So that, I think, in itself is a positive thing. And I have been traveling back and forth to Somalia, and this was the first time I have seen people talking about settling down for good now and saying this is the beginning. But as the other guest is mentioned, yes, it's corrupt, and although we were expecting some corruption, but not many people were expecting that much, and it has been widely reported the whole selection process is corrupt, and the UN interference, again, obviously is not helping, I think. So I would say there is optimism, and it's earlier days, but there is so much corruption going on.
Well, Abdi Ismail Samatar, I want to get back to that point you raised about the composition of Parliament. There should have been 275 members of Parliament nominated. However, there's nowhere near that particular number. Many of those suggested have been ruled out by a tribunal, a technical panel that went through the various candidates. But do you think that this very essence of Parliament itself, those who are members of this Parliament and who will in fact elect a president, is a part of what we are going to be looking at as a problem in recent weeks, rather in coming weeks, rather than a solution?
Michael, I was in Mogadishu literally 3 days ago, and I so happened to stay in the same compound as the technical committee, so I heard a great deal of rumors and reports from those individuals, to the point where current President Sharif came to that committee, which is supposed to be independent, and began to scold them for not coming to his sort of a palace to report to him. So there are issues up there. But I think the two key things to watch here is that if the United Nations wants to sort of restore its deeply soiled reputation, then the first thing it will do is to ensure that the 30% of MPs who are supposed to be women will be there, rather than allow the elders, who are nearly all male, to select all male parliamentarians. So that's the first thing to know. The second thing to note, Mike, is that the United Nations has a great deal of appreciation on the part of the Somalis during the independence days. Over the last 20 years, it has been part of the problem. So currently, I think it has an opportunity to restore and redeem its reputation if it's able to make sure that parliamentary votes are not bought. The essence I found in Mogadishu last week was that a parliamentary vote is going at the price of $5,000 to $10,000. So monitoring that very carefully, ensuring that votes are not bought, that there is a legitimate competition among those who have been selected as members of parliament rather than elected as members of parliament, then that is where the hope is. Whether the United Nations will be able to rise to that challenge or not is open to question, and only time will tell.
Hoyafieri Elmi, we've heard there now a number of times that the United Nations, which is supposed to be part of the solution, may actually be part of the problem. Why do you think this is the case?
Well, the tribunal is neither a political nor is it, an independent technical thing. It sort of became a political court where all kinds of actors, including the incumbents, and I mean incumbents, including the three sitting incumbent politicians and the SRSG, have been using to disqualify or add a new member. And I think this has really damaged the process permanently. When you look at the people who are being held, they're not just Wolo. There are others as well that are being held for all kinds of different, reasons. And when you look at the way the UN has been approaching the issue, is that they own the thing, they own the whole process, and the Somalis are just there to watch. So when Somalis are not owning their own process, take the case of the traditional elders. They wanted to play a part of the process. They wanted to become a second chamber. They also wanted to select their own politicians that would represent in the parliament. And all of these, at least when you look at it, and there are so many exceptionalities to the rule. Here is the rule, but it doesn't apply. And this is not a process. It's sort of a power grab, as I would say.
Well, Jamal Osman, is there a sense here that the United Nations is trying to get this off the table, that it is rushing a timetable that has already taken 8 years and just wants to get on with it, get a real government in place, and then say, hey, we've done our job? Is there a sense of that?
I think the UN might sort of think we want to get this done, but when you talk to Somalis in general, they will tell you the UN is sort of dictating the Somali solution, if you like, and telling Somalis what to do, rather than, as Mr. Afiere mentioned, letting Somalis decide what's best for Somalia. And most of these UN officials are not obviously Somalis, and they might know something about Somalia, but it's quite a complex society, and they know very little about it. So they are dictating the whole process of the whole political process in Somalia, and that is counterproductive, I think. They might rush through things, but we might be back to square one again.
Well, Afieri Elmi, we heard their mention in the introduction of the Operation Restore Hope, that US-led attempt to resolve a famine and do what they believed was best for Somalis, which ended in absolute disaster and failure. Is there a sense that we have, once again, outside intervention, pretending that they know what those in the country really want and attempting to define what they should be doing for them?
Well, my expectation is that there will be an incremental improvement, as has been the case for the last couple of years, but I do not expect a major change. And particularly when you look at the security aspect of the country, it's either foreign or foreign funded. And when you look at also the politics of it, it is the UN and others that are commanding and are in control. So this perhaps will continue, and sort of a de facto UN rule or UN trust. But I hope, given the level of the Somali awareness and how committed Somalis and the resilience of the Somali people, I think eventually something good will come out. So I'm not that pessimistic when it comes to the future of the Somali people as a whole, but at least from this specific process, I am really critical to it, and I think it will not advance the cause of peace as we would love it to be.
Well, Abdi Ismail Samatar, we heard their reference to the security situation, Mogadishu supposedly under control of the transitional federal government, yet that swearing in of the parliamentarians took place at a heavily guarded airport next to the African Union troops base. Is the danger that the security situation, the precarious security situation, is being ignored or at least left off the table at this particular point?
I think the reason why the newly selected rather than elected parliament was sworn at the airport was primarily for the security of the internationals. That's the UN people and others who are guests to this process. So that's the first thing to know. I think Parliament could have been sworn in a relatively more better ambience in parts of Mogadishu, given that I was there last week. But the thing to note, which I will disagree with my colleagues here, is that Somalis, we have to take responsibility for this. I think, if you look at what has happened in the Arab Spring, in places like Egypt, in places like Tunisia, when the population came together and faced the gauntlet of an extraordinarily well-armed regimes in Egypt and Tunisia, they were able to steal the day from the jaws of the lion, so to speak. My sense is that if those elements in the new parliament, who are civic in nature, who are progressive nationalists, who respect their faith and the well-being of their people, I think we can be able to do so as others have done in Egypt and elsewhere. The last thing I would like to say here, Michael, is that Mogadishu is relatively safer. There are pistol shootings from here and there. There's an occasional sort of a suicide bomber and whatnot. But the population feels much better today than they literally did 8-9 months ago. And so the African Union force, if it becomes an occupying force trying to suffocate the aspirations, the political aspirations of the Somali people, they will in fact feel the same music that the Egyptian soldiers and the Tunisian soldiers have done. Here is where the Somalis have to begin to stand up now. There is a window of opportunity, in my opinion. If the 30% of the parliament who are supposed to be women are given their positions, and if the civics who have been able to sneak by the manipulation of the process are able to put together a project that can appeal to the population, I think we will be able to pull the wool over the eyes of the international community and restore the dignity of the population and the country.
Well, we heard their reference to Somalis having a responsibility themselves. Now, the recent reports about the aid, about the revenues going into that transitional federal government are devastating. The World Bank estimates that 67% of revenues did not get entered into that transitional federal government's coffers. We are looking at what would appear to be widespread corruption. Jamal Osman, the UN monitoring group itself, says that only 3 out of every $10 actually went into those government's coffers in 2009, 2010. We're asking for responsibility here, but clearly there has been in the past absolute corruption. And in fact, some of the presidential candidates who are standing were involved heavily in that transitional government. Is there any hope that that would change?
I think there is hope that will change, and there are many Somalis who feel passionately about their country and their people who are heading back to Somalia, trying to help rebuild Somalia. And I think, as Dr. Samatar said, we should take responsibility. But I think where we differ to Egypt is that we have weaknesses, which is clan division and corruption. And those international actors or the UN exploit our weakness. And I think that is a big issue for Somalis. And I wish they could be united and be one. But in reality, that's not the case. So I think we should not blame the foreigners for everything. But as you said, some Somalis are also corrupt. But there is hope. Many Somalis are heading back to Somalia, who have lived in foreign countries for a long time, who are desperate to resettle back home. And I think that will help Somalia.
Well, Afyari Elmi, we're hearing there about Somali unity. We have made reference to Al-Shabaab. Is that part of Somalia, or would they be classified as well, along with outside forces intervening? Should they be included in this process?
Well, I think Professor Samatar and Jamal are also right that there is a hope. But what I would say first is that this hope can only materialize if the intervention is reduced, both at the politicians' level and also at the UN level, and the gerrymandering of the process, and those who are just interested to manufacture what they want, the product that they want, I think must be controlled. That would help. In terms of Al-Shabaab, I think eventually Al-Shabaab, and I have written this in length, eventually there has to be some sort of political and military solution to their problem. Military is not going to be sufficient, but it might help. And I think some form of reconciliation or some form of agreement, political agreement, might be needed. And this, by the way, finally, let me just say that when we're talking about transitional justice here, because some people are being disqualified that they have been warlords or this or that, I think transitional justice is broader, and it needs to be addressed in at least a comprehensive way, rather than selectively picking one or two, or just, I think it will be unfair to the Somalis who have been killed that Ekis, who was a criminal, has been just barred from parliament. That is not the way to approach transitional justice.
Abdi Ismail Samatar, what's your view of this? Should a group like Al-Shabaab be included in the process? Is there a political solution being ignored here?
I think we need to divide Al-Shabaab into three categories. The foreigners who are into projects that are bigger than Somalia, those have to be dealt with militarily, in my opinion. The second group is the Somali leadership of Al-Shabaab. And that group, again, is divided into two parts, what I call the nationalists and the fundamentalists. The nationalists, I think, can be negotiated with, and so on and so forth. But the vast majority of the young men who fight for Al-Shabaab are our boys. They are Somali boys, oftentimes child soldiers, and they should be treated like child soldiers and be provided opportunities to get away from Al-Shabaab. The final thing I would like to say, Michael, on this matter is that it's quite true that Somalis are divided. But if you actually walk in the streets of Mogadishu, as I have done last week, and if you talk to ordinary people, you will begin to see the kind of unity among the population that most people have dismissed for so many years. It is the political class and the warlords who have been divided, because that's their game, divide and rule. And my sense is, if there is a platform that comes out of this political project that's taking place in Mogadishu today, the parliament and so on, if that platform is used to rally the population, I'm absolutely confident that the population will come together to restore peace and get on with the business of reconstructing the country.
Well, Jamal Osman, very briefly, your view of that. Do the people of Somalia themselves want to change? Shall we move them away from the politicians and those that have other interests?
I think it will take quite some time to move away from that, and we will have to be united, but there is still division on the ground. And when I go back to the Al-Shabaab case, I travel to Al-Shabaab areas on a regular basis and meet some of their leaders. And I would say it's just one group. They might have slightly different ideologies, nationalism, Islamism, but in my views is they are Somalis, they are Islamists, yes, and you can negotiate with them, you can talk to them, and they can be part of the process, and they are not dying for no reason, they are dying for a reason. So I think we should accept that, and we should try and talk to Al-Shabaab. But I think that will come when the president is selected, whoever that will be. And if he's good enough, then he can solve the Al-Shabaab issue, I think.
Well, many, many points for discussion that could go on and on. But at this stage, thank you to our guests. In London, Jamal Osman. In Doha, Afyari Elmi. And via Skype from Minneapolis, Abdi Ismail Samatar. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. If you want to send us your feedback, email your thoughts to insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks again for watching. I'm Mike Hanna. Goodbye for now.